Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you are in the world. I hope this finds you well. Today, we're going to look at the US stock market compared to Bitcoin, as well as we're going to look at Kaspa, and we're going to also look more specifically at Bitcoin on its own to kind of gauge where price could go from here. And the reason why I want to draw attention to the US stock market is because there is correlation. So you can't look at anything in a bubble. You have to look at it in confluence with other factors. One of them would be the US stock market. There is a clear correlation between the price action of the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 as they relate to crypto and Bitcoin. And Bitcoin has been around since 2009, 2010, and the US stock market has generally been in an uptrend since then. And one thing we can notice is that anytime, for example, that the NASDAQ has come and broken out and then back tested, has generally led to a appreciation in value for Bitcoin. So as you can see, just early on in 2011, 2012, while the NASDAQ was breaking out and then back testing, it not always immediately led to an appreciation for Bitcoin. Like for example, right here, Bitcoin continued down, but the more times that the NASDAQ continued higher and back tested, it eventually did seem to increase confidence in Bitcoin, you could say. Potentially there is a correlation there. So we can look at even right now, we can see what happened here. The NASDAQ has broken out, and assuming it might come down and back test this all-time high at the very least, that would be kind of to be expected. And you could wager that maybe a back test and seeing that the NASDAQ holds this level of support and then continues higher would in fact bring more liquidity into Bitcoin. And you can see this playing out kind of over and over again over the last decade, where the NASDAQ breaks out, back tests, and ultimately that is good for Bitcoin. As you can see here, we had this COVID capitulation, we had this back test, and that ultimately led to Bitcoin increasing. One could also say that this has to do with the Bitcoin halving. It's possible, but if you look at this cycle in particular, we are actually ahead of schedule. The Bitcoin halving is happening in the next day or so, and Bitcoin has already set new highs, which is a first for Bitcoin. This has never happened before, and one could say that, hey, maybe this has something to do with the US stock market, the NASDAQ, breaking out into new highs, and this was ultimately good for Bitcoin. So looking also at the S&P 500, very similar. You can see all of this price action where it is breaking out, back testing. Bitcoin ultimately heads up, breaks out, back tests, Bitcoin heads up. We had a much larger capitulation here during COVID than we did on the NASDAQ, which was less steep. And in any case, when it got back above, back tested this high, you can see Bitcoin continued up. And as we can see here, similar things, back testing this accumulation range that was ultimately also mirrored by Bitcoin, and it continued up. And again, if the S&P 500 comes down, potentially back tests its previous peak set in 2021, that might be a good sign for Bitcoin. as far as buyers coming in and pushing the price up. The caveat to all this is that, as you can see, the S&P 500 has been in a steady uptrend essentially since Bitcoin was launched in late 2009. And as we know, there are times when the US stock market has not been in such a steady uptrend like the one we see here. Um, so the dot-com bubble obviously saw a pretty big drop. The 2008 housing crisis saw a big drop. So Bitcoin has existed in this massive bull run in the US stock market. So everything we looked at right here, the caveat would be that this doesn't always happen. If you zoom out even further, um, you can see there are times, right? The Great Depression, um, in the 60s and 70s, we kind of went sideways. And we are currently in this, um, we've been in this steady uptrend for the last decade plus. So that would be the caveat, and something to keep in mind, that if for whatever reason there is a steep correction, we would need to see how Bitcoin responds, because Bitcoin hasn't been through a steep correction like one in the dot-com bubble or in the housing crisis. So we would need to always keep that in the back of our minds. At least I'm keeping that in the back of my mind. Um, and until that happens, we won't really know how Bitcoin weathers that. But as of now, on a lower time frame, we can see that the S&P 500 is doing this cup and handle. It did this cup and handle, and potentially it needs to back test here before it can head up higher. I'd be interested in seeing the S&P 500 reach some of these higher fib levels. Hopefully it can follow through on this breakout. And ultimately, as you can see here, that would be quite good for Bitcoin. And at the same time, just be aware that sometimes the stock market can go down. Like, so if we have some sort of big economic crisis, it can go down. So, which is why it's always important not to overinvest in the markets. And going back to Kaspa, because I know a lot of people want to see that. Obviously, all the liquidity ties in together. So Bitcoin breaking out will be good for other assets in the crypto industry. My conviction right now is high in Kaspa, so it's something that I hold a lot of, and I watch it. And right now I'm watching this descending channel here that we have. We can see how price has in the past, it kind of, when you get a descending channel, it bounces off the bottom, and then eventually it needs to kind of flip the midline of support before it continues higher. So let me move this out of the way. So essentially what's happening here is it looks like it's bounced off the bottom. Potentially it flips the midline of support, comes up, and then essentially gets above the channel and then heads up higher. And I do like that it's in this accumulation range here. So there's a lot of buyers potentially that might show up. This level may be good support. So there's some nice confluence here, in confluence with this channel and then this accumulation range. So that's good to see. And then Bitcoin, we have the two theories of the Bitcoin halving time frame, which would put it a potential peak next year. Then we have this scenario where once Bitcoin broke out, 119 days, setting the first peak, which would put it in sometime this summer. Of course, we have some moving averages to the downside that could potentially hold as support if it breaks down here. They're currently at 52,000 and 54,000. And below that, we would be looking down here at the purple, blue, and yellow moving averages, which I don't think we need to talk about yet unless Bitcoin does break down. Hopefully that doesn't happen. I don't think any of us would want to see that happen. So if Bitcoin can do what it has done in the past, and the NASDAQ, for example, and the S&P 500 can hold their previous highs as support and continue higher, that will ultimately look good for Bitcoin. It will look good for Kaspa. And one could also say, as I would believe, that Kaspa is, in fact, and has been an undervalued asset and will find buyers at any remotely good support level. As the market cap grows and it becomes more fairly priced, it's probably going to trade more in line with the rest of the market. But one could argue that it is still undervalued. I personally believe it could potentially be a top 10 asset in the crypto industry on CoinMarketCap, CoinGecko, which would put it at much higher valuations. So that's not financial advice. That's just my opinion, and I've invested in it, and I'm willing to hold it and see how it goes. So all that said, we're going to continue to keep an eye on the markets, and we'll watch the S&P 500, we'll watch the NASDAQ, we'll continue to watch Bitcoin. And if you want to follow along with my analysis, feel free to subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one. Be well, take care, have a good one.